Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Todd Bilby. I'm with Merck Animal Health, and I also serve as chair of the Education Committee for the Dairy Cattle Reproduction Council. Today's webinar is the first in a series of 4. These webinars are based off of participant survey from the annual meeting that was held in this past November in Indianapolis. And so we take the top 4 speakers and talks from this meeting, and we ask them to give a webinar over the next year. And so the first one that will be given today, the topic of transition cow management, prepartum stocking density, and regrouping strategies. This will be presented by Dr. Ricardo Chebel, who's at the Department of Veterinary Population Medicine at the University of Minnesota, where he's associate professor. Before we get started with that, I just want to spend a minute to thank our webinar sponsor, who is Arm & Hammer Animal Nutrition. And so for each one of these webinars that DCRC conducts, we get a sponsorship from someone that goes into DCRC to help continue to fund the council's initiatives. And so we really appreciate the sponsors stepping forward to sponsor these webinars. I also want to make everyone aware that our annual meeting has been set for this next year. It will be November 13th and 14th in Salt Lake City, Utah, and this will be at the Hilton Salt Lake City Center. Again, that's November 13th and 14th. And so if you have any desire in learning more about dairy cattle reproduction, this is a great meeting to go to, and it's a great council to be a member of to get involved with the different activities and be up to date with the latest in dairy cattle reproduction. So I encourage you to get involved if you haven't had that opportunity. Another thing I want to say is March 27th at noon will be our next webinar, which will be presented by Dr. Jose Santos from the University of Florida, who will talk about animal health and reproduction. So put that on your calendar, March 27th at noon, Dr. Jose Santos on animal health and reproduction. You can find out about the different webinars and DCRC, and these webinars will also be recorded and posted to DCRC's website. So please check out DCRcouncil.org, again, DCRcouncil.org, for all the up-to-date information and latest resources provided by DCRC. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Ricardo Chebel to talk about transition cow grouping strategies. Ricardo?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, Dr. Bilby, for the introduction. I'm speaking from Brazil right now, so if the connection is a little bit shaky or something like that, or if you cannot understand something, please write it down throughout the presentation, and then we can discuss it afterwards. So I hope that the connection is good enough and everybody can hear me. Well, the first thing, when we talk about transition cow health, there are several things we have to be worried about. There are several things that should be on the list of every manager and every consultant to consider. Of course, nutritional management is fundamental, and without a question, I think everybody would agree that intake and dry matter intake and water intake would be on the top of the list. Something else that we routinely are concerned about is feeding anionic salts to reduce hypocalcemia. I think everybody would agree that there's enough evidence out there that support this strategy. Some other nutritional strategies that have been explored and shown good results is monenzyme and choline feeding to reduce ketosis. Some fatty acid feeding, particularly omega-6, which are more pro-inflammatory. So if fed during the transition period would probably help in the immune response of these cows. So there are some data suggesting that would be beneficial. Hormonal treatments, treatment with DST is something that we are exploring in my lab currently, we have some data showing that it will improve immunity and reduce ketosis incidence when we start treating the cows as early as 21 days before calving all the way through 28 days after calving. Then we also have considerations as far as management, duration of the close-up period. That's something that is fundamental. Many herds that we work with in Wisconsin and Minnesota tend to have short close-up periods, meaning that the cows are fed close-up diets for a short duration. So less than 10 days, less than 20 days. So cows are being fed diets that are very low in energy and very high NDF and not adjusted for DCAD as close as 10 days before calving. And in those herds, just switching the cows to a close-up ration 10 days or 20 days before calving tends to create problems because the cows probably don't adapt their rumen to the diet that they should be getting in the close-up period and compromise their metabolism. Reproductive management is paramount. If we don't get the cows pregnant soon after calving, they will be fat when they go dry. If they are fat when they go dry, they tend to eat less during the dry period, and that causes a array of problems that will compromise health and reproduction. Comfort, minimize heat stress is fundamental. Of course, talking about heat stress in Minnesota these days is not much, doesn't make much sense, but regardless, it's something to consider. Housing heifers and cows separately is fundamental and probably should be on the top of the list. And then stocking density and regrouping. So Todd, if you can click the next, the arrow. To me, the main things to consider are the ones that are highlighted red, and those are the ones that I would be first evaluating in a herd if they're having transition cow problems. And then the next ones, part of it would be stocking density. Todd, you can click the next arrow. Stocking density and regrouping would be the next ones. So let's go to the next slide. What we can talk about, and one of the first things we'll talk about, and this is a shorter version of the presentation I gave at DCRC. We're trying to keep this at 30 minutes length. So what is the ideal stocking density in prepartum period? And I was looking at the literature. Let's go to the next slide. And the only thing that I could really find that suggested that would be adequate stocking density was this paper that came out from Etzel's group in Wisconsin. And this was a field trial to evaluate dry cow feed additive where they had heifers and cows grouped together. They had a pre-fresh stall stocking density that ranged from 62 to 138%. And then they had no stall overstocking in the post-fresh pens. So in this study, which was a retrospective study or a prospective study to look at cow feed additive, they retrospectively evaluated how the stocking density affected milk production. So the idea of the study initially was really to look at feed additives, but they found no differences in feed additives, how they affected milk yield. So they went back and looked at some interesting information as far as how the difference in stocking density before calving would affect milk production. And what they found was that nulliparous animals produced 0.73 kilograms per day less milk for every 10% unit increase in stocking density above 80%. So that means that if the stocking density prepartum went from 80% to 90%, remember, these are heifers and cows grouped together, the production of the heifers went down about 1.8 pounds per day, okay, in the first 180 days. The problem here is that this is retrospective data. When we look at retrospective data, we cannot control for several other factors that may have affected the performance of these cows that were exposed to different stocking density. So if a cow or a heifer was, let's say, exposed to stocking density of 138%, well, that could have been in the summer. We all know that there's this lug of calvings during the summer, so maybe during that time that there was high stocking density, there was also summer, and that could have been part of the problem for the health of the cows or the production of the animals. So if we go to the next slide, because of that, we did a study in Minnesota where we hypothesized that having an 80% stocking density would be better than 100% stocking density. That would improve immune function, metabolic parameters, and then health and production of the animals. So we had 324 heifers, 404 cows. They were assigned to one of two treatments, and the treatment started about 30 days before calving. So the idea was during the close-up period, they would either be at an 80% stocking density or 100% stocking density. So 80%, these were small pens, but 38 animals, 48 headlots, and 44 stalls. Whereas the 100% stocking density would be 48 animals, 48 headlots, and 44 stalls. So actually, we were overstocking above 100% as far as stalls go in the 100% treatment. Important mention here is that the heifers and cows were kept separate throughout the study and after calving as well. So, like I said before, a paramount discussion that has to be done is, are we separating heifers or not when we discuss these issues? After calving, all the animals were housed in the same pen when they were heifers or cows. So they were separated by heifers and cows, but the treatments were the same, housed in the same pen after calving. So if you go to the next slide, you can see a picture of the pens. You can see these are cross-ventilated barns. The cows were actually jerseys. 80%, 90% of the cows in the study were jerseys. We have 38 cows, 80% headlocks, stocking density, and 86% stocking density on the day of regrouping. For the 100% treatment, we have 48 cows, 100% headlock stocking density in the day of regrouping, and 109% stocking density for stalls. So if we go to the next slide, we can see the parameters that we collected, the information we collected. We collected behavior. You can click throughout this slide, Todd, so that it makes it easier for everybody to follow. So we followed the animals with behavior. We had cameras on the roof of the pens so that we could monitor how they interacted with their herd mates or their pen mates. We had body condition score, lameness score, collected at 28 days before calving, 35 days after calving, and 56 days after calving. So we were trying to monitor body condition score and locomotion score throughout the transition period, including calving. From 2 weeks before calving to 2 weeks after calving, we collected blood samples to look at immune function, look at hemogram parameters and metabolites. So the idea here is, if there's so much stress because we're overstocking the animals, well, one of the responses would be compromising immune function, and if that's true, we would expect the health to be compromised. Metabolites, well, if we think that there's so much competition in the feed bunk, maybe let's say the more subordinate cows will eat less, so they're going to have more NEFA, NEFA meaning mobilization of fat from their body to supply the energy that they need that they cannot get from the feed bunk. We also then examined the animals for retained placenta and metritis at day 1, 3, 7, 10, 14 postpartum. And then we also evaluated them for endometritis at 35 days after calving. And we followed the animals. We collected data on displacement of abomasum from calving to 60 days in milk, and also mastitis, milk yield and milk composition up to 150 days in milk, and reproductive performance from first AI all the way through 150 days postpartum. So we tried to do a study that would evaluate several responses to stress: behavioral response, immune response, and also the hormonal response to stress. One of the problems that we have in smaller studies is that many times people are focusing on the behavior part of things, but are we really, just the fact that the behavior of the animal is changed, is that really so bad to the animal? Stress is something that everybody faces, all of the animals face it all the time. I mean, how much would that really impact the health of the animals and so on? So if you go to the next slide, we can see what the stocking density was for headlocks, and you can see that the headlock stocking density for the 80% was a little bit lower than we expected. It was about 74%, and then the 100% stocking density as far as the headlock goes was about 94.5%. Of course, you move a group of animals to the prepartum pen, then they start calving out, so that number goes down, and then you have to replace them. We removed new animals into the pens twice a week to try to maintain as constant as we could of stocking density in the headlocks. As far as the stall goes, we had actually 80% stocking density for stalls in the 80% treatment and 103% on the 100% treatment. So we were happy with it. There's a significant difference between them, but we can probably say that there's not that much pressure, but there's a significant difference. Next slide, we can see the line behavior of the animals. So what we see is that the animals basically up to close to calving, up to about 10 days before calving, the line behavior is almost the same. The line time is almost the same. But when we get close to calving, last 8-9 days before calving, there's a significant reduction in line time of the animals in the 100% stocking density. Perhaps they're more nervous. There is definitely less space. So maybe they are spending more time standing. Maybe they're eating less. Maybe there's going to be more problems with locomotion score and things like that. So there are some changes in behavior. The next slide, we can see that there was also a difference in the behavior as far as displacements from the feed bunk. So we can see clearly that by reducing stocking density from 100% to 80%, we reduced the number of events of displacement from the feed bunk, so competition in the feed bunk, quite dramatically. We go from about 15 events to about 21, 22 events per day. Okay, so the question then is, these changes in behavior, how do they affect the metabolic parameters and the health? So let's go to the next slide. And the first thing is, and I'm not going to show the data here because we don't have that much time, but we looked at the function of the white blood cells of the cow. So we collected blood samples and we ran assays in the lab to see how well those cells would kill bacteria that they were exposed to. And there were no differences. Basically, the immune function of these cows was working exactly the same. Looking at the NEFA, non-esterified fatty acid concentration, also there were no differences. So meaning that perhaps the mobilization of fat from these cows was the same. Either that or they were using them differently. But since these were dry cows, they were not using it for milk production. No difference in non-esterified fatty acid concentration shows us that the mobilization of fat during the transition period was the same. BHBH, beta-hydroxybutyrate concentration was the same as well, meaning that the liver is being able to metabolize this fatty acids that are being mobilized from the cows pretty much the same. So metabolic parameters are also similar. When we look then at health events, the table that we're going to show now is basically the same, no differences whatsoever. Okay, so retained fetal membranes, you have the first lactation animals, so heifers, primiparas, multiparas are the cows. You have the 80% and 100% stocking density, and you can clearly see. Let's go to the next. Click another one, Todd. There you go. So if you look at those p-values, you can clearly see that there is no difference. Okay, no difference in retained placenta, no difference in metritis, endometritis, or mastitis in the first 60 days in milk, or lameness up to 56 days in milk. So even though we saw some differences in the behavior of the cows, we are not affecting the metabolics, the metabolic parameters, immune function, and the health of the cows. What's interesting, click the next one, Todd, and it's actually interesting to see that in the cows, the 80% stocking density cows had 17.5% incidence of metritis, and the 100% had 9.6, and that resulted in a p-value of 0.11. So if our hypothesis was that reducing stocking density will improve the health, well, that pretty much shot our hypothesis to the ground. Okay, so we looked at removal from the herd in the first 60 days, no difference either. So you have 5% for 80% heifers and 6% for the 100% heifers, and then 6.9 and 4.3 for the 80 and 100% cows. Again, showing that health of the cows in the transition period seems to be similar. Pregnancy per AI after first AI is also very similar, actually numerically higher for the 100% stocking density. And milk yield is dead even. Okay, so you have heifers 29.6 kilos, 28.9 kilos, cows 38.9 kilos, and 38.8 kilos, so exactly the same. So if we go to the next slide, we're concluding then from this experiment that 100% stocking density caused changes in behavior, particularly lying time and displacement from the feed bunk. But stocking density did not affect innate immune function, incidence of health disorders, body condition locomotion score, energy-corrected milk yield, or reproductive performance. So I think the importance of this experiment is that, well, first of all, the idea that 80% is much better than 90% of 100%, or any increase from 80% will cause problems, well, that doesn't seem to be really the case. And that's important because by saying to the dairyman that we have to be at 80% all the time, we are reducing the use of infrastructure that is very costly to build. Okay, so I think this is important, but important also to remember that in this study, heifers and cows were kept separately. So when we go to regrouping of dairy cows, that's the next topic we'll discuss. Let's go to the next slide, Todd. And this is a very interesting experiment that was done in Canada at the University of British Columbia with 80 high-producing cows. Okay, so they had 4 groups of 11 cows per pen. Those were the test pen. And then there were 3 groups of 12 cows per pen, which were the font pen. So here's the idea. Let's go to the next click there, Todd. Okay, so on the left, you have the 4 groups, or one of the 4 groups of 11 cows per pen, which is the test pen. Okay, and then the right, you have one of the 3 groups of 12 cows per pen. What they did then was identified 1 cow on the pen on the right, and then they moved this cow to the pen on the left. All right, and then what they did was they observed the behavior of these cows from 3 days before to 4 days after pen change. Okay, click the next one, Todd. Okay, so here you have basically how this study worked. Moving 1 cow from the right to the left and seeing how their behavior, that cow's behavior changed 3 days before movement and to 4 days after movement. So if we go to the next slide, what's interesting in this next slide is that there were changes in behavior. There is no question about it. Reduced feed time during the first hour after pen change. So those cows that were moved ate 15 minutes less in the first hour. Increased number of displacements from the feed bunk in the first day after regrouping. So if you look at that graph on the right side, you can see that that cow on the day before removal was, let's say, suffering 10 events of being pushed away from the feed bunk or pushing somebody else from the feed bunk. On the day of the movement, she was pushing more cows out of the feed bunk. It went up to about 25 events. The day after movement was about 20 events. And then after that, 48 hours later or so, it went back to the same as it was before almost. Okay? And then there was also reduced resting time in the first day after regrouping and reduced milk yield on the day of regrouping. The important thing is, obviously, there is a change in behavior. Yes, that is a fact. These are animals that work in groups. They like to be with their herd mates. But these are very transient changes in behavior. And so the question is, are these changes in behavior, transient as they are, as bad as we think, and would that result into changes in immune function, health, and so on? Let's go to the next slide. And this is actually a slide from part of it from Dr. Nigel Cook. Let's just click them as you go, Todd. What you have basically is a group of animals moved into a pen. You have that spike in adverse reactions between animals, and then after 2 or 3 days, those adverse reactions and interactions between the animals would go down. And then, let's say everybody calves out, you bring a new group in, there is social disruption, after 48 hours it goes down and so on. So the idea of the all-in, all-out system is that there is transient disturbance, but most importantly, close to calving, there is no disturbance whatsoever. Okay? And then the conventional system would be a little different. There's continued disturbance because you bring a group of animals in on Monday, okay? The cows calve out. Then next Monday, you want to fill up that pen, so you're bringing new animals in, you cause more disturbance. And so there is always a constant state of disturbance because you don't allow that group to, let's say, get acquainted with each other and then reduce stress before calving. So the idea of the all-in, all-out, which was much talked about 2-3 years ago, was let's reduce the stress close to calving to improve the health of the animals. The problem with some of the data that this was based on was that they were small studies on behavior, mostly without any evaluations of metabolic parameters or immune function. And also, click again, Todd, and these were studies that were done in small herds or small pens of 8, 12 cows. And in many cases, we're working with dairies that are 1,000 to 10,000 cows, and the closed-up pen is 50 to 350 cows. So we don't know how that would really play out in a larger herd. So let's go to the next slide. This one, I hope, can be easily understood, but it's basically a map of one of the herds that I work with in Minnesota. So you have cows going from the far off to the closed-up pen. Click, Todd, please. 28 days before calving. So you move the animals to the close-up. They stay there up to calving. Click again, please. And then what you have basically is they stay in the maternity for 12 hours, up to 12 hours after calving, and then from there they go to the hospital pen. And then from the hospital pen, 24 to 48 hours after calving, they go to the postpartum pen. And then after 21 days, they go to the breeding pens. So basically what we have here are 5 pen moves within a 50-day period. Click again, Todd, please. So what we're looking at is, again, 5 pen moves within a 50-day period. It's constant moving that may cause disruption in behavior. Besides that, once the animal is in the close-up period or in the close-up pen, well, it gets there when it's 28 days before calving. So when that cow is 21 days before calving, a new group of animals will come in. When she's 14 days, a new group of animals will come in, and so on and so forth. So the traditional movement of animals that we use in most large herds would create constant disturbance of those cows in the prepartum period. Okay, so if we go to the next slide, we then did this study in Minnesota again. We had 567 cows. These were actually cows. We didn't use any heifers in the study. We had 2 treatments. The all-in, all-out group. Okay, the all-in, all-out group was basically groups of 44 cows moved to the close-up every 5 weeks. So there were no new cows entering that close-up pen until everybody had calved. The idea was, let's reduce social disruption, increase dry matter intake, increase performance. The downside to it would be an increase in cost because we could actually reduce stocking density in that pen and increase the cost of management. The next treatment was basically a conventional treatment with cows entering the close-up pen weekly to maintain stocking density of 44 cows per 48 head lots. Okay, we brought in 5 to 15 new cows every week. Click again, and this is basically the layout of the pens. Again, a study with Jersey cows. What's interesting in this picture here on the left side, you see one bright, like white udder in one of the stalls. Well, that's the last cow of that replicate that stay there. On the right side, you have the pen of conventional cows. You can see the cows are marked, their hair is dyed, because we were filming the cows to look at behavior like we did in the other study. Of course, you can also see how stocking density would be compromised in the all-in, all-out situation and how an increased cost would incur from this kind of system. So if we go to the next slide, we basically have an idea of what the study was like. Again, a very similar design with a lot of stuff collected, a lot of data collected. Again, in this transition cow studies that we've been doing in my lab, we're trying to do a very holistic view of the animal: behavior, immune function, metabolites, health, function as far as locomotion, production, and so on. So we did the same things: behavior in the prepartum. We did body condition at several points throughout the transition, weekly blood samples for immune function and hemogram and metabolites, and also exams of the animals for diseases like Britain placenta, metritis, and so on. We also collected data on mastitis and DA, milk yield up to 305 days in milk, and reproductive performance up to 305 days in milk. Okay, so let's go to the results. Here is the stocking density in the pens. Okay, so basically the red line are conventional, and you can clearly see I bring a new group of animals in on day 0, a bunch of them calve out up to about 7 days, and then I bring a new group of animals in. And so you maintain a more constant stocking density of about 86.9% throughout the study in these pens, but the all-in, all-out, because at day 0 you bring a bunch of animals that are almost all the same days carrying calf. They are going to start calving almost at the same time, around 20 days after starting the close-up period, and then you have a decrease in the percentage of cows there, so you have a much lower stocking density of about 72%. So theoretically, there will be 2 advantages to the all-in, all-out compared to the conventional: the reduced disruption in social interactions, but also the reduction in stocking density. So if we go to the next slide, what we have basically is how the treatments affected displacement from the feed bunk, okay, and that's events per cow per day. All right, so the blue line is all in, all out. You can see that from the 1 day after regrouping all the way, or actually from 1 week after regrouping to 5 weeks after regrouping, basically it stays constant, about 0.3 events per cow per day. Whereas the conventional, it varies much more because you're bringing new cows in. So it goes from 0.8 all the way down to about 0.4 events per cow per day. So we are actually affecting behavior of the cows by doing the all-in, all-out system with less, let's say, negative interaction between the cows. Okay, let's go to the next one. What's interesting, though, is that even though there are more displacement, or there's a greater displacement rate in the conventional system, the number of cows eating, or the number of cows at the feed bunk at any given time during the day is almost identical. Okay, you can clearly see that around 5 o'clock in the morning, the cows were fed. There is a spike in number of animals eating, and then it goes down again. So there are two things. First, percentage of cows eating or percentage of cows at the feed bunk at different times during the day, not really that affected by the all-in, all-out system. And second, cows are animals that like to do everything at the same time, particularly when there's fresh feed and fresh water in front of them. So we have to have good access to the feed bunk and the water trough. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. And again, in this slide here, it's a very straightforward slide. Again, the all-in, all-out strategy did not improve immune function. So again, the white blood cells were not more competent in killing bacteria. The antibody production of these cows was not any better. And that's important for the health of the cows, but also for the colostrum quality, which was not different. Measures of metabolic parameters like NEFA and DHBA were not different again showing that mobilization of fat and the processing of the fat was probably similar between the two treatments. And then finally, when we go to the next slide, we can clearly see that there's really no difference in incidence of diseases. So we have retained fetal membranes, metritis, acute metritis, DA, and co and that's basically the same. So retained placenta, 11%, 11.5%, metritis, 17%, 20% for the all-in, all-out. Acute metritis, 1.7 and 3.6. Death and co, 9.1 and 8.9%. Okay, so really no effects on health. Cyclicity, 90%, that even. Pregnancy per AI, conventional was about 36.3%, all-in, all-out 39.9%. A little numerical disadvantage for the conventional, but considering everything else being the same, exactly the same, it's really not suggested that the all-in, all-out improved reproductive performance. It's probably more just, by chance. And then when we look at production of energy-corrected milk throughout 305 days in milk, it's dead even, 34.4 and 34.3 kilograms per day. So the conclusions from this study would be basically that let's go to the next slide, Todd, please. The all-in, all-out strategy reduces negative interaction among cows in small and medium-sized pens. The pens that we have data on are 45 cows or less from the literature. The number of negative interactions, though, appears to return to normal within 2 to 5 days after regrouping. So even though behavior is affected, it seems that it goes back down, or the negative behavior goes back down within 2 to 5 days after regrouping. All-in, all-out strategy had no benefit to immune function or metabolic parameters, health, production, or reproduction. Okay, so like I said before, we're trying to have a very holistic view of the animal, looking at different responses to stress. Yes, behavior was affected, but the other parameters were not. The other thing that is very important, particularly when looking at management, is that the stocking density in the all-in, all-out was reduced, 73 versus 87%, which results in an increase in cost to build the close-up pens in about 16%. So if you talk to most dairymen today, the cost of building free stalls for close-ups is going to range from $2,000 to $5,000 in some cases. Well, that can represent about $320 all the way up to $600 per cow. That's a significant cost. So if there are no benefits to the all-in, all-out strategy as far as health and so on, it's really difficult to justify. Let's go to the next slide, and that's something interesting. in this study, at the end of the 35 days of the replicate, there were always 1 or 2 cows that were still in that pen that had not calved, like that one cow in the picture that I showed you. So there were actually a total of 17 cows that did not calve within 35 days in the all-in, all-out pens and were regrouped within 4 days before calving. Okay, so what happened was that cow had not calved. She was moved to a new pen, but we still use that data, okay? We still use that data in the analysis. But what I did here was I compared the all-in, all-out cows that did not have to be regrouped to these 17 all-in, all-out cows that had to be regrouped because they had not calved within 35 days. Like I said, the average interval from this extra regrouping to calving was about 4 days. Most of the cows calved within 7 days after regrouping, this additional regrouping, and one cow calved 24 days after their regrouping. Okay, so just to make sure that the animals are somewhat similar, twinning and male calves were the same, 3.8 for the non-regrouped and 0% for the regrouped in twins, and male calves were the same, exactly the same. Okay, let's look at some healthy parameters. Metritis, the same, 20 versus 17 or 18%. DA, 1.8% versus 0% for the extra regrouping. Cyclicity, 89.6% for the non-regrouped and 100% for the regrouped. Pregnancy per AI after first AI. Actually, when you look at the p-value there's a tendency for the animals that were regrouped an extra time to have better fertility, 62.5%, than the non-regrouped, 38.3%. And finally, when you look at milk yield, energy-corrected milk yield, of the non-regrouped was 32.3, and the ones that suffer an extra regrouping 4 days before calving was 39.1 kilograms. So we're looking at almost 12, 14 pounds extra per day in these cows. And I don't think it's because we have to regroup the cows 4 days before calving. I think it's probably because these cows stayed in the close-up diet a little longer than the other ones. So if we go to the next slide, then it's just a conclusion of the things that we are concerned about as far as management of transition period is aggressive reproductive management. We have to get these cows pregnant within 100, 110 days, 120 days. Of course, there are several factors to take into consideration, but if we're extending our days open too much, the cows are going to be fat when they enter the close-up period, and that's going to compromise their transition period. Close-up period, the close-up diet, the cows have to stay on it for at least 21 days. We have to feed anionic salts. Okay, I think there is pretty good evidence out there now that it doesn't compromise feed intake, and it really improves as far as reducing incidence of hypocalcemia. Feed bunk space, we've been recommending 27.5 inches to 35 inches per cow. The higher feed bunk space is particularly important for pens without headlocks. Okay, those pens without headlocks, you have to have more space per cow. Smooth surface, easy to clean and remove stale feed. That's really important to improve feed intake and allow for 3% leftovers at least. Okay, water availability is critical. You can see on that picture on the upper right there, of course, now, that's during the summer. But regardless if it's summer or winter, the cows have to have good availability of water. Water intake is directly related to dry matter intake, so 2 to 5 inches per cow. We also have to be concerned about the cleanliness of the water and the number of water troughs per cow. So if I have 2 to 5 inches of water bung or water trough space, but I have one trough for 100 cows, that's not going to help me. So I have to have one trough for about 20 cows. Comfort, heat abatement, cleanliness, and dry, comfortable bedding is fundamental. Grouping strategy, that's one of the things that I really try to work with dairymen, and I really think the investment there is worthwhile. Separating heifers from cows is an investment that I think is worthwhile. Reducing changes in feed composition is definitely more important than reducing the number of times the cows change in pens or pen changes. So if you have to change the cows from pen to pen often, that's fine as long as the feed composition is the same across those pens. And so if you're separating your heifers from the cows, keeping 100% stocking density, on the day of the move, on the day that you bring new cows into the close-up pen, seems to be a good strategy as long as you're separating heifers from cows. Well, with that, I thank you very much for your attention, and I hope that we have some time for questions.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ricardo. That was an excellent webinar. I appreciate you taking the time to give that to us today. So for those of you on the line, if you want to go to the top there, you should see a button for Q&A. Feel free to push that Q&A button, and that will put in questions for me that I can ask the group. So if you have any questions, please type them in on the Q&A, and I can ask those to Ricardo for the group. So while you're looking or coming up with questions to type in, I got a couple for you there, Ricardo, just to get started. So this was all done with jerseys, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So do you feel, I know in your crystal ball here, but if you were to do this again in Holsteins, do you feel like there would be, you would get the same type of results?
We're actually working with one 3,000 cow herd in Wisconsin right now on an experiment with stocking density, and that's a Holstein herd. And what we're finding there is that if we keep stocking density below 100, 105% of feed bunk of headlocks, we have no problem whatsoever. So as far as headlock availability or headlock stocking density, I'm pretty confident that it will translate to Holstein. As far as the all-in, all-out, many people have said that, you know, the jerseys are more sturdy and they seem to resist more to stress. You know, we're not finding that, at least, you know, from the experience that I have with Holstein and jerseys. I mean, we see reduced incidence of some diseases, but as far as, you know, how NIFAs and how BHBAs and how body condition loss during the transition affects health, we see the same effects on Holstein and Jersey. So I would suspect it to be the same, but I haven't done the all-in, all-out in Holstein cows. Okay,
excellent. How do you? So this is going from basically understocked or at 80% of what the industry used to recommend to 100%. How high do you think we can go? Do you think if we go to 110 or 120, I know these are speculative crystal ball type questions, but I'm just curious of your thoughts on that.
I don't know. I really don't know. We're actually sending a proposal in right now to look at that. And the next step for us right now is 120%. Like I said, in this Holstein herd that we're working with, an interesting thing in this Holstein herd is that we have those neck collars that have rumination and activity, and we also have hobos for line behavior of these cows. We are getting up to about 103% stocking density, and we're not seeing any effects. And we also have, you know, a bunch of metabolites being measured and so on. So I think if we get to 100% on the day of the move, and you're moving once a week or twice a week or even 3 times a week, I don't see how that's going to affect it. Go much above 105%, I'm not sure.
Okay. What question here? You know, if a dairyman's sizing his operation to build the dairy or to build the ultimate transition cow facility here, and 100% stocking is fine, is knowing like places in the Southwest where you've got the heat stress, and so you have gluttons of cows come in at one time due to the fact of the poor fertility during the summer. What would you expect them to shoot for 100%, or would you still go for the 80%, knowing that you're going to have glutton of cows coming in at certain times, taking you to the 100% and then back down? You see what I'm saying?
Yes, I do, and that's a very good question. The best way to do this is really to look at the historical calving of the herd. So if you have dairy comp or PC dart or whatever it is, it's easy to look at when the highest frequency of calving is in that herd, and then you basically design your your close-up pens for that specific time when the slug of cavities is the highest. So for us, for example, in some of the herds that we work with, usually it's June, July, August that we get the most cavities. Sometimes as early as May. So May, June, July is when we have the most cavities. That's how we project our close-up pen. So let's say a 1,000 cow herd is probably going to have about, in average, somewhere around 90 calvings per month. Because of how reproduction works, usually it's not, average 90 cows in every single month. Usually in May, June, July, in a 1,000 cow herd, you're going to have as many as 110, 120 cows calving in that month. And then in the other months that are down in calving, you're going to go down to 80, 70 cows per month. So I would project my close-up pen to that phase when I have 120 cows calving per month.
Okay, great, excellent. Another question here towards the last slide there, you talked about the 17 cows or so that you had to kind of regroup that hadn't calved within that time period. And you had a pretty big numerical difference, and it tended to be significant for pregnancy per AI, and then energy-corrected milk was significantly better. Can you speculate why this is, and do you plan on looking into that more?
That's a good question. And we looked at the metabolic parameters of these cows, and they actually also have better metabolic parameters with lower non-esterified fatty acids than the other group. And I think it's because those cows stayed 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 extra days in that close-up diet. This is a herd that is relatively high producing for Jersey standards, somewhere around 70 pounds per day. And I think that additional feeding of DCAD diet and a diet that is a little higher in energy and a little higher in protein have a significant effect, or has a significant effect on the health of these cows. So if I had to bet on anything, I would say probably longer time in a diet that is a little more appropriate for setting up those cows for production. Okay.
Excellent. Well, that's all the time we have for questions. Ricardo, I really appreciate your time and your novel research challenging a lot of the dogma out there surrounding stocking density. So thank you. I just want to remind everyone again, there'll be another webinar March 27th presented by Dr. Jose Santos. This will be at 12 p.m. Central Standard Time on animal health and reproduction. And also the DCRC's annual meeting will be November 13th and 14th in Salt Lake City, Utah at the Hilton Salt Lake City Center. So thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of the week.
Thank you. Thank you very much.